Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Monday, October 9th, 2023. It is 9:04 a.m. The session is set to go until 11 a.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board, and the boardroom is Vice Chair Ty Menser, as well as Commissioner Gary Edwards. We have Interim County Manager Robin Campbell and Assistant County Manager Rob Gelder.
Yes.
Okay, and this is a follow-up to the Grand Mound Subarea Plan briefing, and there was information requested at the last briefing. And so I will pass it to Joshua Cummings, Director for Community Planning and Economic Development.
Great. Thank you, Chair Mejia. This is Joshua Cummings. I am the Director of CPED, Community Planning and Economic Development. We have Maya on the Zoom here. She'll be the lead on the substance of the item. But you've heard this before, but it bears repeating. I just wanted to provide my appreciation to the Board of County Commissioners for providing a path forward on the docket items, and the planning commissioners for working forward on those docket items, and the staff for bringing them forward. You may hear that some of these docket items have been on the docket for consideration in terms of cleaning up the house and the docket items for a decade or more. And recognizing that the plan that CPED put in place a couple of years ago to clear those items and bring those to the Board of County Commissioners for consideration is exactly what we're in now. And so while it has been potentially frustrating in the community to not have things addressed sooner, all I can speak to is the present and provide my appreciation for the work of the board, the planning commission, and staff on trying to move these items forward. So as you think about the internal items with the Grand Mound and the externalities that we've discussed, make sure you keep that in mind, that this is a success in progress. And while it can be difficult at times, the bureaucratic process has been relayed. This is actually a big win that we're to this point. And I really appreciate the work that's been done thus far. So, Maya, without further ado, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks, Josh. Maya Tipo, Senior Planner with Community Planning. I'm going to share my screen and have the PowerPoint up. Okay, Grand Mound Subarea Plan. This is a follow-up from our September 25th briefing. I do want to be clear that we are asking for a couple of decisions from the Board of County Commissioners today. Not a formal vote, but those preliminary decisions will be rolled up into the once per year comprehensive plan amendment action, and that is slated to happen in November or December at one of those end of the year meetings. So the information and the decisions you make today, we will use to finalize all the maps and the plan and bring that forward at the end of the year for the board to take a final action and adopt. So today's agenda, I'll go over the requests from the commissioners at the last briefing on September 25th and some of the information that was asked for at that meeting. I'll go over a summary of the decisions that were made already and the remaining decision points, and the commissioners will have an opportunity to discuss and take a preliminary vote. And then I'll recap the next steps for moving this item forward by the end of the year. So the Grand Mound Subarea Plan update has been on the official docket for quite some time. It's been on the official docket since 2017 as item CPA 7A, and it is one of the board's highest priorities. Over the last several years, it's been the #1 priority of the county commissioners. So today we are talking about the 2023 items, which were before the board for a public hearing on September 19th. And what that includes is the Grand Mound Subarea Plan, so the long-range planning document that was first adopted in the 90s and really has had minimal updates since. The Thurston County Code changes, and those address lot widths and design guidelines. And then 4 citizen-initiated land use and zoning requests. And the 4 that the board will have the opportunity to talk about today are the Steelhammer request, the Fire District property, the Tribal Trust lands, and the Morgan property. There are a couple of items that fall within the Grand Mound Urban Growth Area and Subarea Plan that will continue their review into 2024. And those are primarily citizen-initiated land use and rezoning requests. and include the Deskin, the Black Lake Quarry, the Wilmovsky properties, and then a Black Lake Quarry alternative proposal and the Jackson property. And the board does not have the opportunity to make a decision or final action on those this year. We still need to move those through the UGM Urban Growth Management Subcommittee. So there are some remaining legislative steps that we need to take before the board can take a final action on those, and those will return in 2024 for further review. So going over some of the requested information from the last meeting, I'll start with a brief history of Grand Mound and how that zoning came into place, and then go through some of the buildable lands information. The history of Grand Mound, it really began in the 1970s, so before a Growth Management Act was really in place. And when Thurston County started planning for this area, we were looking at it beyond just what is the Grand Mound urban growth area today. So it encompassed the Rochester subarea, which is a much larger area surrounding Grand Mound, and also today's modern day Grand Mound urban growth area. And that began in the 1970s. And the first action that the county took was to develop the Rochester subarea plan. So that came into play a little bit before the Grand Mound subarea plan was formally adopted. And the main vision at that time was to establish a growth center. So a center in South Thurston County that promoted growth and economic development. The residential density was generally a little bit higher, and there were some industrial uses and zones cited in that area. And in the late 1980s, the industrial zoning, primarily planned industrial and light industrial, was applied, and then the Grand Mound subarea plan was adopted in 96. And the zoning that you see today in the Grand Mound subarea plan, has been the same zoning that was applied when that plan was originally adopted. So the adoption of that zoning was not only to reflect on the ground uses that we were seeing in the Grand Mound area, which there was a lot of industrial and commercial, some mining operations that already existed, the railroad tracks were there, but also planning for the future. There were, and still are today, several vacant and undeveloped properties in that area. And so the long-term vision, again, was kind of an economic center and seeing those areas fill out as industrial and commercial uses. So the main zones that were adopted in Grand Mound were the arterial commercial, light industrial, and planned industrial districts. And those had regulations and districts even before the subarea plan was adopted. They go back to 1984. So over 10 years before that subarea plan was adopted, we had regulations governing uses in those areas. But the first widespread application was really when the Grand Mound subarea plan was adopted in 96. And today, when we look at zoning across Thurston County, planned industrial district, the PID zone, is exclusively located in Grand Mound. So that is, that's the only area we see that zoning district. Arterial, commercial, and light industrial do have locations elsewhere in Thurston County. So they're not exclusive to Grand Mound. They occur, there's some in Yelm for light industrial, and then within the UGAs, and then arterial commercial has some locations kind of in the Nisqually Valley as well as the Grand Mound area.
Maya, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yes, you can.
To the last slide, I think just to remind the board that former County Manager Chavez would often liken Grand Mound to the Frederickson in Pierce County. And that was with the idea, with the kind of the focus on growth, economic diversity and vitality, is really trying to make strategic investments in that area to be able to support that eventual build out of the Grand Mound area. So just wanted to draw that analogy.
Thank you, Assistant County Manager. And that's a great point. Grand Mound is actually covered in what is called I believe it's called a federal economic opportunity zone. So there are some federal advantages, and I think it ends up being like a tax advantage for certain types of commercial and industrial uses within that area. So beyond the county level, there are also federal incentives for economic growth in that area. And that's been as recent as last year that was still the case. So Looking at the community visions for the area, so when the sub-area plan was first developed, and in 1995, when we were working on that plan, we held several workshops with the community to ask them what their vision was for the area. And we have the vision statements. They still live in the sub-area plan today. We brought those back out to the community in 2018 through just as recent as last year, and asked the community how they felt about those vision statements. Are they still relevant? What we heard was that generally the community felt that those statements were still relevant. There are some new issues that have come up, and most of those are centered around things like traffic conditions, ensuring there's enough parks and open space in the broader area for that Grand Mound community, and then having a better use of balances in the community as opposed to just being a highway pit stop. So those are the things we heard within the last 4 years from our community, but by and large, the vision statements still stand true. And most of those vision statements are around things like envisioning Grand Mound as an economic trade center, encouraging industrial uses appropriately so that they don't conflict with neighboring residential uses, but can still take advantage of the close proximity of I-5 and the rail interchanges there. And the envisioned purpose of residential was mostly to infill at a higher density along that old Highway 99 corridor, and then moving back from that old Highway 99 corridor, a little bit lower density, but still higher density than what we see in our rural county. So looking at the zoning for Grand Mound, this is a breakdown of the current zoning that applies in the Grand Mound urban growth area. Planned industrial is the most prevalent zone, that's about 37%, and then arterial commercial is the next most prevalent zone. In terms of residential zones, residential 3 to 6 is definitely the dominating zone in terms of acreage, and then the 4 to 16 units per acre, which is the more dense residential zone, is quite a bit less. We only have 20 acres of that right now in the Grand Mound urban growth area, and it's mostly along the old Highway 99 corridor. And then I will go through a breakdown of what kind of uses are allowed in each of these zones so that the commissioners can get a better idea of the differences before considering the rezone requests. So planned industrial district, this is the largest designation. It's around 37% of the Grand Mound urban growth area. Again, this is a zoning district that really only applies in the Grand Mound urban growth area for Thurston County at this time. And the original, the way we originally mapped this in Thurston County was over existing industrial uses and also over vacant undeveloped lots that were near to rail lines and near to the I-5 corridor. And this zone specifically is an industrial zone that is basically the light version of light industrial. So it allows for almost exactly the same uses as light industrial, except that there's no aggregate processing like brick, stone, things like that, and no mining allowed within planned industrial district. So it's an industrial district that's meant to kind of protect from neighboring residential uses, as opposed to light industrial where you can do the mining and the processing that comes with that. And other types of uses that are allowed in this beyond just mining, actually most of the uses we see in this zone are not related to mining and processing like that, but ambulance service, truck repair and equipment repair, commercial uses like banks, restaurants, cafes, bars, and taverns, assembly, fabrication, and manufacturing of products, processing and storage, transportation terminals, wholesale business, welding, vet clinics, things like research and development laboratories, and also commercial testing laboratories. And within the Grand Mound area, we do have a variety of these types of uses. A lot of times they pop up as just like what you would expect a commercial building to look like, kind of like in the Lacey, north of Hawks Prairie there, you have those big commercial buildings. And we have some, specifically some research and development areas in the north part of Grand Mound that fall in this district. So the light industrial district, this is a much smaller percentage of the Grand Mound urban growth area. It's only about 11%, and this was originally cited over existing industrial uses, primarily mining uses that were existing in Grand Mound. And again, allows pretty much the same as the planned industrial district, but it also allows for aggregate processing and mining. Arterial commercial is the primary commercial designation within Grand Mound. It covers about 26% of the urban growth area, and it's located mainly along the arterials and in high visibility corridors. So the old Highway 99 corridor and up where the I-5 interchanges is arterial commercial. And this allows for a broad range of highway uses and also high density residential. So within the arterial commercial zone, you can develop multifamily residences at residential 4 to 16 units per 1 acre. You can also put barbershops, beauty stores, bookstores, newsstands, grocery, hardware, dried goods. I won't read through this whole list, but a variety of different types of commercial uses, storage facilities, boat and wholesale sales, car washes, service stations, restaurants, just kind of a wide range of commercial uses that are allowed in arterial commercial. And now looking at the residential zones that fall within Grand Mound, we have residential 3 to 6 units per acre and also 4 to 16 units per 1 acre. So residential 3 to 6 per 1 acre is the predominant residential zone that we see in Grand Mound. It's set back from that old Highway 99 corridor, and it's the zoning district that backs up to our rural area on the other side of the border of the UGA. And then residential 4 to 16 is primarily along Old Highway 99. The original intent when that was first put in place was to provide for more affordable housing. So things like multifamily apartment complexes, triplex, duplex, things like that along that corridor. And it also allows within the 4 to 16 per 1 acre for neighborhood commercial uses. So Thurston County has a commercial zone that's called neighborhood convenience commercial. And the same uses that are allowed in that zone are also allowed within this high density residential. And it's a very light list of commercial uses that are allowed in that. Typically commercial uses to support the surrounding community, things like grocery stores, banks, video stores, mail services, laundry services, beauty and hair care, and then professional office spaces like medical, dental, and veterinary. So summarizing the land use requests, I broke this into 2 charts. The first is the internal requests, which are the 2023 items before the board and for consideration today. And then the bottom of the list is the 2024 external requests. Even though we don't have an opportunity to take a final action on the 2024 requests this year, I included it in here for context so that we can have this conversation holistically, kind of thinking about, you know, what's upcoming for the vision of Grand Mound.
Hey, Maya,
So, yep, go ahead.
just real quick, in defining, I know most of us understand what internal and external is, but for those that are viewing, can you define internal and external, please?
Yes, so the internal requests are for land use and zoning requests that all fall internally to the urban growth area. And then the external requests all fall outside of the urban growth area. So they are outside the current border of the UGA. And some of those external requests have requested to amend the UGA to include their properties.
And what was the board's decision direction for us to proceed on the internal?
The direction was to move forward the internal requests this year.
And to wait for information on the external on at least 2 or 3 of them?
We're going through environmental review on all of them, and then for 3 of these external requests, we're waiting on information from the industrial land study and also from the housing allocation process that we are going through right now with the partnering jurisdictions.
So that's how we got here today, was the board reviewed all of those different items and directed staff to proceed with conversations on the internal to the ground mount, to the UGA.
If I may, is there a reason that the board could not take action on the external requests should they want to?
Can you talk about the UGM process, Maya?
Yes, so there are a couple of legislative steps in the process that we have not completed for the external requests. The first is the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee, which we are required to move through any requests that are asking to change the UGA. And we need a recommendation from that subcommittee to bring back to the Board of County Commissioners. The second piece is we need to complete SEPA environmental review for all 4 of these items on the bottom list. And finally, the Board of County Commissioners will need to hold a public hearing on those 4 items since they were not included on the September 19th hearing.
Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up? Go ahead.
I just want to just fill that in. I mean, the UGM subcommittee, I'm on that committee and I might have been able to accelerate the timeline, but as I understood it, the driving issue was the environmental review could not be completed. And so given that, it seemed like why not let the UGM subcommittee have this new information that's coming, more balanced decision there, feeding into something that could not have been resolved in 2023 anyway.
Right, move what you can and
And then, yeah, and then correspondingly move what can be moved in the internal request.
great.
And then, when would that subcommittee meeting take place?
So last I had heard, there were plans to do a subcommittee meeting in October, but I think that got bumped to November. This will not be the only item returning to the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee. They have a couple of other items that they need to bring forward. So it's making sure that we have a date where everything can move forward. So at this time, probably November. The good news to that is hopefully we'll have, before we may have only had the industrial land study for that meeting. Now it looks like we might have the housing information from the allocation process and the industrial land study by the time they meet again in November. So there's a chance we can knock it out with one UGM subcommittee meeting. The environmental review will probably take into late spring or mid 2024. So we're looking at on those external requests, potentially mid to fall 2024 for an earliest timeframe for the board to take a final action.
That's good news on the housing allocation. That's new. Thank you for that.
Maya, I have to ask, the industrial land study, I keep hearing it's coming, but I haven't seen it and it's October and you're saying we're gonna meet in November and I have to digest it and I probably will understand it a lot better than all the other members of the UGM subcommittee. So when are we gonna have that in hand so we can be ready for November?
The last I had heard was we were expecting to receive it last week on Friday, a draft of it, and I have not connected with the staff person who's working on that project, so I'll be doing that early this week.
So will I. And then also that's receiving that from the consultant, correct?
That's correct.
Who is on the subcommittee?
The UGM?
Yeah.
On the Urban Growth Management Subcommittee, Maya, along with Commissioner Mincer?
I don't have a full list. I believe the tribes have representatives, the other cities have representatives, and I'm not 100% sure of the full list, but there's quite a number of folks who are participating on that subcommittee.
And then how would a citizen get on that committee that has an interest in this?
I believe it's open to the citizens to watch and listen to those meetings, but I don't think there are citizen spots on that subcommittee. It's mostly jurisdictional and agency representatives.
So it's all elected officials from elsewhere?
That's my understanding of it, yes.
It's not elsewhere, it's in Thurston County.
Yeah, I mean, surrounding area.
It's basically a council member from each city and one from the county. And then the tribe, I don't think the tribe is there, but I don't think they actually even vote. I think it's almost like ex officio for the tribe.
And it's facilitated by TRPC.
Correct. Okay. It's a subcommittee of TRPC officially.
As part of their planning duties. And then Maya, you just touched on it briefly. Our items are not the only thing that's being considered at the UGM. Other jurisdictions have items on the list as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. My understanding is there may be some countywide planning policies that need to move through that subcommittee specifically related to the recent changes in state law around tribal public participation in comp plan processes.
So it's kind of a big deal to try and bring all these different jurisdictions together. So I think the UGM decided to bundle everything at the same time, so they didn't have to meet twice. But it all, like Maya said, is kind of potentially gonna have a confluence of having information that we wouldn't have had otherwise, so it could be a positive.
I guess at some future date, I'd like to at least see the RCW that designates how this will be handled and who will be participating on this and just in case citizens, it sounds like citizens are not allowed to be on there right now, but I don't know if the legislature oftentimes changes things that we don't even get made aware of right off the bat, so.
So for clarification, the RCW on the UGM process?
Yeah, and how that UGA subcommittee is put together and who gets to be on it and all that, so that, because right now, if I get asked by a citizen, well, how can I participate? I gotta say, well, I don't know. And I don't like to say I don't know, so I've been asked that question once and I had to say, I don't know. So now I'm asking some questions about how that process comes about. And maybe they need Commissioner Mentzer's on there, maybe that's my answer. Talk to Commissioner Mentzer, he's your representative or something. So I just need to know that information and, you know, we're still under the 3 county commissioners and so consequently, I can't talk to my seatmates outside of this meeting, and if we discussed all that kind of stuff, we'd never get done with the meeting, so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And Maya, just to wrap that point up, these, what we're calling the internal requests, they don't have to go to that subcommittee because they don't involve a proposed expansion of the UGA, is that correct?
That's correct. None of the 4 internal requests are amending the UGA. They're all already within the Grand Mound urban growth area.
So what's next, Maya? You wanna get us back on track with the internal discussion, or?
Yeah, so I'll continue the discussion on the internal requests. Again, there are 4, the Steelhammer property, the Fire District property, the Tribal Trust Lands, and the Morgan property. And this map is probably fairly small, but 3 of these are in the south portion of the Grand Mound urban growth area. And then there is 1 just along the old Highway 99 corridor at the far northeastern part of the urban growth area. So looking at the impact to lands within Grand Mound when we're considering these rezone requests, so there are kind of 3 different colors for the columns here. The white is our current zoning that is applied in Grand Mound right now. The yellow is what that zoning becomes when the internal requests are all all included in the update. And then the blue is what that becomes when both the internal and the external are included in the update. And I did this primarily to show the change in each type of zoning designation. So just looking at the internal requests, all of these zones are requesting to go to arterial commercial. And currently 2 of the properties are within the planned industrial district and 2 are within the residential 4 to 16 units per 1 acre. So we see a small drop in the residential 4 to 16 units per 1 acre. Percentage wise, acreage wise, it's about 5 acres that would come out of that zone. And the planned industrial district, we see a little bit of a larger number. Most of that is the Tribal Trust Lands property. So that zone change is just primarily to make it consistent with the uses that are already existing on that property, drops at about 5%. And then we see a 6% increase in the arterial commercial. When we look at this in consideration with the external requests that will be coming back to the board in 2024, it's kind of a mixed bag. And a lot of these numbers and the percentages change. I think there's 2 or 3 that change, although the acreage doesn't change. And that's because the overall size of the UGA would be growing by over 100 acres because of the requests to expand the urban growth area. So we see quite a big increase in the urban growth area size for this internal and external side. And again, a large increase in arterial commercial and light industrial, a smaller increase in residential 4 to 16. That's primarily because the Womovsky properties are quite large. They're the only ones requesting to go to that zone. And it bumps it up quite a bit, even if we consider the properties that want to come out of it this year. And then we see a smaller decrease in the residential 3 to 6 units per acre. And planned industrial has a bigger percentage down, but it's none of the external requests are out of planned industrial. That's just because of the UGA acreage change.
Hey, Maya, I think this is a helpful chart, and if I'm recalling correctly, this is kind of in response to Commissioner Mintzer's, it would be helpful to see the bigger picture and what might happen with all of the different considerations. Is that correct?
That's right.
Is this helpful in that concept? Thank you, Maya.
And so visually, just to show what that looks like in terms of the colors, the far left here is our current zoning in Grand Mound, and all of the areas that are with the dotted lines are the land use requests. And then this middle picture is what it would look like in terms of color if we have the internal requests, all four with an action taken on as they are requesting. So the red is arterial commercial. You can see the area in the south of Grand Mound gets rezoned to arterial commercial, and then there's a small property up here that would also get rezoned to arterial commercial. And then looking at the external requests and how that impacts kind of the zoning in Grand Mound, you see an extension of light industrial in the northwestern quadrant of Grand Mound. That's a UGA request. We have a large request for more arterial commercial on the old Highway 99 corridor with the Deskin property. And then we have some higher density zoning requested on the far western side, the Wilmovsky property that's on the other side of that brown. And then the internal rezones would be the same as applied in the middle frame.
And what's the there's the Jackson one you didn't mention, and it's like dark purple. What's that all?
That's right. So the Jackson is dark purple. They are not requesting to amend the UGA, but it is a rural rezone that would border the Grand Mound urban growth area. And their request is to go to rural resource industrial. So that's another type of industrial district that we have in Thurston County that applies within the rural areas. They don't need to be included in the UGA to go to that type of district. And that allows for a variety of types of industrial uses and some more intensive industrial uses like warehousing if it's within a certain proximity of I-5 and a rail interchange.
So that will not go to the UGM subcommittee?
It will not go to the UGM subcommittee, but it does still need the environmental review, so.
Okay.
So looking at buildable lands, the bottom line up front is that the buildable lands finds the 2021 report finds that there's sufficient capacity in the urban growth areas within Thurston County to support growth over the next 20 years, both population growth and industrial and commercial growth. And currently across all of the urban areas within Thurston County, that excess capacity is about 18%, which is within the healthy range. The healthy range, I want to say, is like 14 or 15 up to 24% or something like that. And then in Grand Mound specifically, when we look at that, again, sufficient lands to support residential over the next 20 years at the current zoning, and the excess capacity for that is about 22% based on the current zoning. So industrial and commercial capacity is the same. Looking at Grand Mound specifically, we have about 249 acres in the current zoning that is either vacant or redevelopable. A lot of that land might fall in the redevelopable category. Some of those industrial lands actually have single family homes on them that have just been in place for decades, and those kind of fall into redevelopable. So it doesn't mean that it could easily be developed, but still accessible for future uses if there is a need be. And the need for that is about 33 acres by 2040 planned. Again, industrial and commercial within the buildable lands report, it's a super light analysis, which is why we're going through this separate study for the industrial lands review, and to get kind of a more in-depth understanding of how much we really need given current economic conditions and trends. We did contact TRPC and we asked them to reevaluate those numbers based on the land use and zoning requests. At the time that we did that, we had them consider all of the changes before the county. So both those that are within the urban growth area and those that are outside of the urban growth area requesting for a UGA change. And so the TRPC staff broke it up into two groups. There's group one, which is the Steelhammer Tribal Trust Fire District, Morgan and Jackson properties. And then group two is those that request a UGA change, so Black Lake Quarry, Deskin, and Wilmowski. And again, unfortunately, this is not broken up to how the board is considering it right now, but same concept, gives it kind of a holistic picture. So group one reduces residential capacity by about 24 units. And that's primarily because of the two properties that pull out of the higher density residential zoning. And group two increases by 182 units. And that's because of the Wilmowski request to add land back into the high density residential zoning. So altogether, we see a change of about 158 units when we're looking at all of these rezones. To the urban areas across Thurston County, that's less than a 1% change in excess capacity. So it leaves us within a healthy range for excess capacity in terms of growth and what we need over the upcoming years. Even with a smaller reduction, if we're just looking at kind of this group one of 24 units, that brings down the excess capacity for Grand Mound alone, and it's still at around 16%, so it's still within a healthy range for the Grand Mound urban growth area, even if we're just making the changes that fall in the requests before the board today. So looking at industrial and commercial, again, Buildable Lands kind of does a really high level analysis of this. It's not super fine-tuned like what we're going through with the industrial land study, but the same process was used to evaluate this in the memo in 2022 by breaking it down into two groups. The first group increases the industrial acreage by about 4.2 acres, and then the second group increases the acreage by 49 acres. So altogether around 53 acre gain, and that's just over a 1% increase in the acreage that would be available for urban areas. So still within a healthy range for commercial and industrial uses. So decision points for the Board of County Commissioners. The board has already provided some decisions around the sub-area plan and the items for this year, specifically on the Grand Mound sub-area plan and the development code amendments, the design guidelines. And the remaining 4 decision points for the board's discussion today are on the land use and rezoning changes. And again, these decisions that you provide me today, I'll use to prepare the final documents, and those will be brought back to the board for a final action in November or December. So we need the information today so we can finalize the maps and make the plan look nice for final action. So on September 25th, the board elected to have staff make changes to the sub-area plan based on public comment. We're working on those at this time. No additional direction needed there. For the code amendments, just to recap, we are making the changes to those development guidelines based on public comment that we received. No additional guidance needed from the board there. And then moving into the land use and rezone, so there are 4 of these. I figured we'd just take it slide by slide. We can start on the Steelhammer, or we can start on a different one if the commissioners wish, and we can have a discussion. And if you need any additional information before arriving at a place where you can make a thumbs up or thumbs down, then I'm happy to provide that and answer questions.
I don't have any questions. I'm ready to do it.
Okay, is there a preference on where we start, or should I just start with the Steelhammer property?
That's the way it's listed in here. I mean, might as well keep it in order.
Yep. We can follow the PowerPoint you have printed out. So looking at the Steelhammer property, this is in the southern portion of the Grand Mound UGA along the old Highway 99 corridor. They are currently at residential 4 to 16 units per 1 acre, and their request is to go to arterial commercial. So before the board are 2 options today, either to leave it at their current zoning or to change it to arterial commercial. And if there's other options that the board wishes us to consider based on public comment, we can have a discussion around that as well.
I'm ready to vote.
Thank you. Okay, so you're ready to vote, Commissioner Edwards? What's your vote?
Yes, ma'am. Thumbs up for change to
Okay.
arterial commercial.
So option 2. Okay, Commissioner Menzer, are you ready to vote, or do you have any questions or additional comments?
Yes, I have lots of questions. So,
Okay.
I'm not as concerned about items 3 and 4. What I'm interested in is on the 2 proposals that are trying to take the tan area, which we have 20 acres in the Grand Mound Subarea, to the red. I'll just use the colors, where we have, a plethora of acres there. I guess I'm just wondering, what is the justification from, to what extent is that a concern? You said that the tan area was designed to try to promote higher density residential along that very corridor. And if we knock out about 25% of that, taking the 5 out of the 20 acres to make red, how is that consistent with that goal? Is that important to keep that little piece of tan? I know you said kind of complicating thing is you can do some commercial in the residential and you can do some residential in the commercial, but I don't know how realistic that is given, if that's true, then I'm not sure how you did your calculation for the number of units that would be lost if you change it. You said there would be a loss of units, but if you can do one in the other and the other in the other, then how does that work? And I guess that's just a question. I'm just wondering. I really appreciate this overview. I think this is the information the board needed to have to even logically or rationally make any of these decisions. So this is kind of what I would expect us to have seen. And now that I'm seeing it, I have a question about, do we want to make more red, which we have plenty of, and lose that little piece of tan, high density zoning, which we don't have very much of? Is that important? Maybe it's not.
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer that question for you. As you noted, the arterial commercial zone does allow for that same high density residential zoning. And what the buildable lands report kind of reports back on and how they make those assumptions of, rezoning this one and the next one would result in a 24 unit loss gain. What they assume, and this is based on the Population and Forecast Committee, so quite an extensive process went into making these assumptions in the first place. This was back in 2017 to 2019 that group met. Is that about 10% of the arterial commercial zone will ultimately be developed out for that high density residential. So we can expect that some of those arterial commercial areas within Grand Mound will eventually be developed as high density residential. In short, the effect to the excess capacity and kind of the long-term projections for Grand Mound is it still would leave Grand Mound, even if we just consider this one and the next one, not even thinking about the future requests, it would still leave Grand Mound within a healthy capacity for housing units for the next 20 years. Again, we're going through kind of some new housing information. This is, aside from that, we're not thinking about that yet because we don't have a full picture painted for that. But it drops it down to about 16% excess capacity, which is we'll still have more availability, more zone available for housing than we will need over the next 20 years.
But that type of analysis, as you said, is super high level and superficial. And my understanding was that the legislature has told us we can't stop at that level, that high level anymore. We've got to go down deeper and look at income levels and try to project for the existence of adequate affordable housing for folks that, may need that. And so my question is, taking that next level analysis, what does that tell us here? Do we need to retain these 20 acres of tan development in order to meet the requirements we're going to have under this new analysis that's going to have to be incorporated into our comp plan amendment next year?
Yeah, the affordable housing that you would see in this tan area will still be allowed. You're not allowed to go below that density in this red. So you're still only gonna see that type of more dense housing if it's developed in the arterial commercial area. In terms of income brackets and the housing allocation and things that are gonna come out with that, what we will likely see is there may be development regulations that need to be changed to encourage certain types of higher density units. It might not be as much of a zoning issue as it is a development regulation issue, but it's still too early to tell based on that process because we're still moving through it at this point.
So yeah, I just feel like we could get in a situation where we make a decision now and then we find out in 6 months, well, we shouldn't have made that decision. And we know that that's not gonna become housing, or these folks wouldn't be going through the trouble of changing the zoning. I mean, if they wanted to do residential, they've got that, and they've got the ability to do some kinds of commercial. Sounds like there's heavier commercial. I didn't quite get the difference between the two lists, but some types of commercial can be done in what they've got now. More can be done, and if you're going through this laborious and difficult process, I would imagine you've got a clear plan of what you're gonna do, and it's not gonna be 4 to 16 residential housing. That's just kind of how I'm thinking about it. Am I off base and thinking it through in that way?
No, you're right. And within the tan area, you're really only allowed to do kind of smaller commercial uses that are supporting that internal community. Arterial commercial, you have a much wider range. There's a lot more flexibility to the landowners to what type of commercial they want to put on their properties. From a planning perspective, arterial commercial kind of encourages mixed use a little bit by allowing that higher density zoning and the wide range of commercial uses. So there is a possibility we could see mixed use developments along the old Highway 99 corridor, and then the residential areas back behind it. But you're right, it's hard to say. How they develop that property is probably going to be purely economically based and kind of driven by that and the needs and the desires. So
just real quick, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
When are we gonna see this, you said that we may have housing analysis even for the November UGM subcommittee meeting. So when are we gonna see, and what will it look like, and will it help me? It sounds like Commissioner Edwards doesn't need it, but will it help me work through the issue that hopefully I'm trying to show my thinking out loud so you can kind of help me get me to where I need to go to make a decision here.
Yeah, what I expect that we could potentially have by the November UGM subcommittee meeting is the housing allocation numbers. So kind of what number by income bracket we will need within each, rural and urban areas. And my understanding is that I don't know that it will be broken out by specific UGA. It may just be kind of UGAs across the board, cities, and then the rural unincorporated county. So we expect to have numbers by income bracket, and hopefully we'll have those by the November UGM subcommittee. In terms of the policy and the code changes that we need to make to respond to those numbers, that's not something we will have by the end of the year. That's stuff that will be developed over the next 2 years, and we probably won't see that information until towards later in 2024, early 2025.
And I think there's a couple of, I appreciate Commissioner Mintzer sharing his thinking out loud. I think it's important to address the thinking process because a couple of, I think, reasonable logic leaps were made, but there's a lot of things that we can't say. We don't know what that property owner is going to decide to do with their property if it's rezoned to arterial commercial. So we can't rightly say that that housing goes away. As you said, the less dense housing is not allowed in arterial commercial, but that 4 to 16 is still allowed. So you'd still have, that property owner still would have that opportunity for mixed use. So I wanna make sure that that logic leap is addressed. So they could still have dense housing in that red, if it makes pocket sense to their books, right? The zoning is a broad tool, and Maya addressed this. If we're going to get at affordable housing, that's addressed in the development regulations. If we're going to ensure that property owners are going to build low affordable housing, then we need to have that in the development regulations, not in this zoning tool.
Can
which
you
allows
explain
for
a little
the-
bit more about that?
Sure.
How would that work for,
So jump in on development regulations and how the housing allocation, so it's kind of funny, right now, another member of our team is meeting with TRPC on the housing allocation bill. So you're asking for information that's actually being like sussed out in this very moment. But talk about zoning, the big tool that we're talking about now, Maya, versus the future development regulation that we'll address after the state provides us direction.
Yeah, and I'll try and break this down as simply as I can with the information that I have, but zoning is the level of density that we allow those units to occur at. So whether it's higher density at 4 to 16 units an acre or lower density at 1 house per 5 acres. It also determines what kind of uses. So things like your storefronts and your home-based businesses and even mobile home parks are regulated depending on zoning districts. The development regulations can translate to affordable housing, and some of the cities have already implemented some of this stuff. But one thing that I can think of off the top of my head is how affordable housing units are regulated after they are put in and ensured that they stay at an affordable income level for a certain time period. And I believe the primary mechanism for doing that is through tax incentives, but there's a whole monitoring that goes into that, and that gets written into the development regulations in the county code. So there are a lot of kind of nuanced pieces that would get folded into certain density requirements for the rural unincorporated county. Outside of the Grand Mound UGA, it's a little bit more complicated. We'll be looking at strategies about, because we're limited to kind of 1 house per 5 acres. We can't really encourage more dense development in the rural unincorporated. In the UGAs, we can. So it'll be, ensuring that maybe cluster developments, looking and evaluating density bonuses in rural unincorporated county, all of that translates to the development code. So, zoning is the big picture, it's the vision, it's the overall density of what can happen in that area, and the development regulations is how that gets implemented and put on the ground, and then how those affordable units get maintained over time and that we ensure that they stay in place.
And I think that Commissioner Mentzer's big question in terms of losing housing, that was brought up in the planning commission as well. I think just to hit that one again, arterial commercial still allows for that relatively dense 4 to 16. So in terms of shifting from the light brown, which it is now, to the red, that property owner wouldn't lose the flexibility in having the housing available, correct?
That's correct. It would just be that the county would not be limiting that area to that higher density residential anymore.
Maya, this is Rob. Just a quick question. I mean, in terms of a data point, it's my understanding that that area is not served by mass transit. So it's still fairly auto-centric. There's something for the board to consider would be the flexibility of really the difference between the residential zoning and the arterial commercial is being able to create, not only allowing for the multifamily housing, but also looking at the complement of businesses that could be there that minimizes the need for trips. Given that there are
Yeah,
no.
that's a great point, and that's something we've heard from the community is encouraging uses that support their local area within that area. Like grocery stores, there's not really, there's an IGA down in the Rochester area, but there's not a lot of grocery options for folks that live in that area. A lot of them commute to go get their groceries. So encouraging uses that support the local community close by to them.
is there this information, the information that we were talking about that we don't have at hand, what is it likely to tell me or the board in terms of the questions that were being asked today?
For the housing allocation and the future process we're going through with that.
Yeah, I don't want to wait for something that's not actually important, or going to be relevant.
Hey, Maya, take
Yeah.
take a step back, because I mean, that's a really big question. Countywide, it's like, who shares what in terms of the affordable housing throughout all of the county, and what jurisdictions have already committed to affordable housing, what jurisdictions need to. It's also market-based, so the closer you get to the city of Olympia, the higher the prices. The further down in South County, the lower the prices, just in terms of market. And so having all of those conversations right now and feeding into what the county and the jurisdictions within it, how we should all be addressing the housing allocation of affordable housing. It will have data points, but I'm not 100% sure that it's going to be directly one-to-one related to this big, broad tool in terms of the zoning. I do think, back to the original point of Maya, that it will potentially impact the development code regulations. If the board starts to see we need more housing allocation for affordable in this area, then the development codes should then push towards that. But it's premature at this time. Like I said, those conversations are just not happening. Maya, is there anything to add on that?
So, okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Josh. I don't think it's going to give you the definitive answer that you're looking for. If you think about the two questions that are before the board and the results that we might get, we need more affordable housing in Grand Mound. That's one option. Does this rezone necessarily impact that? No, it's how we ensure that that affordable housing is, one, being built in that tan area, and two, being maintained over time, which translates to the development regulations. And if we don't need more affordable housing in Grand Mound, same thing, the concepts will translate into how we're incentivizing that to actually occur within those zoning districts.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit the nail. What I was gonna say is like the development regulation piece, I'm hearing that as being, if someone's building something, how to keep it. But I'm more interested in the first question, how do you make sure we have it to begin with, or that it gets built? And I don't see I'm not hearing an explanation as how development regulation are gonna help with that. That's really what the zoning's about, in my opinion.
Well, zoning is the first step. The development regulations and providing incentives for that kind of development is the second step. And one of the tools that some people use are density bonuses. That can be a big incentive for developers if they get an extra unit or two on their properties, or, additional height or whatever it may be, to do that higher density because it becomes more profitable for them. So that's the big question. And there are a lot of different tools, and that's part of what we're going to be evaluating over the next 2 years is what do we want to do? What are the most effective methods to ensure that that gets built in those zones?
Are you ready, or do you have more questions?
You don't have any questions?
No, you've kind of asked some of mine, but in terms of, the way I'm viewing all these rezones, I've kind of taken a step back, and just trying. I'm still stuck in we need a larger community base. Like, we need a really, I'll use layman terms, as I told Josh, SimCity this. Like, we really need to come up with I think if we're gonna go a certain direction, I think we really need to have, community input and really come up with, what is this community going to look like? What is this community going to be? For me, the rezones are just kind of like a smaller step in kind of this direction, that we're kind of heading. But you've asked in terms of the housing affordability and kind of losing that aspect of, what is it that we're losing in the future? And Maya and Josh have answered that question in terms of that has to be taken care of in the development codes aspects of things, in terms of density bonuses, which I have questions about later on.
Well, if I could jump in, at the beginning of the meeting this morning, the assistant county manager mentioned Frederickson up in Pierce County. And as we've talked about in different venues, the concept of kind of a Grand Mound two-step, which is the first step is addressing all these questions and applications that have been sitting on the docket. So kind of cleaning the house, making sure that the folks that are internal within the UGA that have had these requests for rezones are addressed. And so that's that first step that we're engaged in. And then the second step is potentially as we go into the docketing season in spring, if the Board of County Commissioners agrees that a bigger, larger community discussion and vision with the Economic Development Council, with the folks in the Grand Mound area, everybody coming together about what a huge vision could be in terms of height of the buildings and the types of the businesses that the community wants to attract. All of that is essentially the second step. So remodeling the house. So the first step is what we're engaged in now, all of this cleanup that hasn't been done for a very long time, since 1996. And then thinking, if the board so chooses in spring, about a bigger vision for Grand Mound. And I completely support the board's direction in either direction, but I do know that I've heard from members of the Board of County Commissioners that you'd like to address the individual applications as quickly as possible in service to those applicants. So we're open to receive. The direction is yours. I think that we can do both. And in fact, I think if the board decides to have that second step of the conversation, we'll be prepared with information that we don't currently have. And I think having that time for a full community vision so that people can participate and be thinking about what they see their community looking like in the future will be really beneficial to the entire community. So either way is great. We're open to receive.
Commissioner Edwards?
I just, for the life of me, can't understand how we can take somebody's money 12 years ago and give them nothing for 12 years. And I personally feel it's kind of like extortion. Here we are trying to come up with a solution, and I believe those folks involved in all the planning, following all the rules, have actually laid it out pretty good, that we're still gonna have more than adequate housing. I don't feel we're ever gonna have truly affordable housing until we figure out some way to get government out of the cost factor. And that's about at least 25% of the cost of housing is the government process, permits and delays and such. And you talk about delays, I mean, 12 years is a long time to wait. I think staff's done a great job on laying this all out for us, so I'm ready to move on and get this done with myself, so that's where I'm at.
Okay. Commissioner Munster, is there additional information that you need? Are you ready to vote?
Any additional information?
Okay, so for the Steelhammer land use, Commissioner Edwards, you've said option 2. Commissioner Munster?
1.
1. I will go with option 2.
Great, thank you, commissioners. So this will be included in the final packet that comes by the end of the year, and I will clarify that this was a split vote by the board, so the majority 2-1. The fire district land use and rezone, this is a smaller property, currently 4 to 16 units per 1 acre, and their request is also to change to arterial commercial. It is just north of the property we just discussed. And this is a very small property. It's actually an old fire station. It's pretty much completely paved over. So again, same uses would apply under the new zone, arterial commercial. They could do multifamily residences. They could also do a wide range of commercial uses on that property. And the 2 options are to either leave it at its current zoning or consider changing it to arterial commercial.
Okay, we'll start with questions on this item. Are there any questions? No questions?
I don't have any questions.
Okay. You're voting 1?
Correct.
Okay, Commissioner Edwards?
Just based on the number of, we only have 20 acres of the 4 to 16 zoning.
You're asking me about 1 or 2?
Yes,
I
sir,
am
but
definitely in favor of 2. The fire service is really suffering down in the Grand Mound area, and this is gonna help them in the end. So, 2, thank you.
Commissioner Munster, you said option 1 and you were providing an explanation for that. Go ahead,
Correct.
sir.
I gave my explanation. I mean, those 2, it has nothing, it's just a matter of, we have a very small number, and that's the only place where the county can ensure that there's gonna be multifamily housing. we know that there's not gonna be when we change them, because otherwise there'd be no need to make this change, so, I think that it's important that we keep that balance. It's 2% of the UGA already, so drop even further. So just kind of a big picture analysis on my part.
Thank you. I'm going with option 2.
Thank you, commissioners. This is again 2-to-1 vote, so this will be included in the final package of comprehensive plan amendments. The next one is the tribal trust lands, land use and rezone. This is a much larger acreage. It's close to 50 acres, I believe, or 43 acres actually is the area of this. It's currently planned industrial district, and they're requesting to go to R2 commercial. This is where the Great Wolf Lodge occurs, so it's really just a rezone for formality purposes to make sure we're applying the consistent zoning with the uses that are actually already on the ground. The tribe doesn't go through the county for land use permitting purposes on trust lands that they own, so they really can develop those kind of as they wish. The zoning doesn't really matter. But we're making sure it's consistent with the uses that are on the ground already. Are there questions on this?
No, ma'am.
Questions on this item?
Who's the requesting party on this? Is staff?
This is actually county initiated, yeah, so staff is bringing this forward just for consistency purposes.
Okay. Ready to vote? Okay, Commissioner Edwards?
I'm, option 2, please.
2 and 2 for me.
Thank you. So 3-0, again, this will be included in the end of the year comp plan amendment package. And the last one for the board's consideration today is the Morgan property. This is currently planned industrial, and their request is to go to arterial commercial. Under planned industrial, again, they're allowed certain types of industrial uses. In arterial commercial, they have a wide range of commercial uses that would be allowed. It is right along the old Highway 99 corridor, and the property does border an existing area of arterial commercial, so it would be consistent with the surrounding zoning, and the property is just under 1 acre in size.
Okay, questions on the Morgan land use and rezone?
No questions.
Okay, are we ready to move forward and vote? Commissioner Edwards?
Option 2.
Commissioner Menzer?
2.
Option 2 for me.
Thank you. Recapping, this is 3-0, so this will again be included. So all 4 of these land use and rezoning amendments will be included in the final package that comes in November or December of this year. And so thank you for your time today. I'll prepare those final documents, and we'll bring back a final action. It'll be titled the 2023 Comp Plan Amendments. I do have a briefing scheduled in November to kind of summarize all of those, go over any last minute ones that we haven't gotten through that are upcoming, and the board will take an action either on the November 28th or the December 12th meeting to amend the comprehensive plan, and it will include all of these decision points that you've made today. And that concludes my presentation. If there's any other questions or discussion, we can have that.
Okay, questions or discussions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, seems like there's none. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
Great.
back at 11.
Good job, Maya.
Okay, so
Thank you.
are adjourned